Korean Peninsula, November 1950. It is 25 degrees below zero. Corporal James Ward from Illinois is lying behind a disabled Jeep on a frozen mountain road. His hands are inside his gloves, but the cold has gotten through anyway. His fingers barely move. His M1 Garand rifle is useless. The bolt mechanism froze solid 20 minutes ago. From the north, Chinese soldiers are coming. Not a squad, not a platoon, a battalion. Several hundred men in quilted winter jackets, blowing whistles and bugles, moving in waves. Their tactic is simple and brutal. Overwhelm with mass. Break the defender psychologically. Get close enough that individual weapons do not matter. Ward is not thinking about tactics. He is thinking about one thing: getting to that Jeep. Because mounted on the back of that Jeep is a Browning M2, a .50 caliber machine gun, a weapon that fires bullets the size of a grown man's thumb, a weapon that was designed in 1918 and is still, in this frozen Korean valley in 1950, the most effective thing standing between James Ward and death. He got there. The next 8 minutes, Ward does not remember in detail. He remembers the vibration of the spade grips in his hands. He remembers orange tracer lines cutting through the dark. He remembers the smell of burning metal and gunpowder and something else he does not want to think about. The attack stopped. This happened because an engineer named John Moses Browning, working in a factory in Belgium in 1918, drew a machine gun that would not become obsolete in 30 years. Or 60 years, or 100 years. Today we are talking about the Browning M2, the machine gun that fought in World War II, in Korea, in Vietnam, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. The machine gun that is sitting on American military vehicles right now in 2024, protecting soldiers whose grandfathers were not yet born when it was designed. This is the story of that weapon, and of the man who built it, and of the people who carried it into the worst places the 20th century had to offer. Utah, 1855, where genius comes from. If you think genius means someone who had one great idea, John Moses Browning will destroy that idea completely. He was born January 23, 1855, in Ogden, Utah Territory. His father, Jonathan Browning, was a gunsmith who made reliable rifles for settlers heading west. There was a workshop attached to the family home, tools always within reach, the smell of metal and machine oil from childhood. By the age of 13, John Moses had built his first working rifle, by himself, from scrap metal in his father's shop, not a toy, a functional firearm capable of hunting. He was 13 years old. In 1879, at age 24, he filed his first patent for a single-shot rifle. In 1883, he sold the manufacturing rights to Winchester Repeating Arms. That was the first of more than 40 deals with Winchester over the next 20 years. Then began what weapons historians simply call the Browning period. He invented the Winchester Model 1886 lever-action rifle, the one that appears in every photograph of the American frontier era. He invented the Winchester Model 1897 shotgun, which American soldiers took into the trenches of World War I. German commanders officially protested its use in the Hague court, calling it too brutal a weapon for civilized warfare. He invented the Colt Model 1911 pistol, which is still being manufactured and sold today. He invented the Browning M1917 machine gun, which the American Army used in World War I and continued using in World War II. His inventions killed America's enemies in every major war of the 20th century. 1917. The Army needs stopping power. World War I made one thing very clear: machine guns decided battles. But standard machine guns shared a critical weakness. Their bullets could not penetrate the armored plates appearing on the first tanks and armored vehicles. Standard infantry rounds lost effectiveness against even light cover at longer distances. The American Army set a clear requirement: a heavy machine gun. The bullet must penetrate light armor. It must effectively engage aircraft. It must work equally well on ground vehicles, aircraft, and fixed defensive positions. General John Pershing sent the request personally. "Browning, we need your help." Browning was 62 years old when he took on the project. He started from his existing M1917 design and scaled it up. The caliber went from .30, which is 7.62 millimeters, up to .50, which is 12.7 millimeters. That is roughly the diameter of a human thumb. He strengthened the mechanism for the increased forces involved. He redesigned the barrel for the heavier round. By 1918, the prototype was complete. Testing showed it worked. Armor penetrated. Aircraft engaged. Mechanism reliable under field conditions. The war ended before the M2 reached the front, but the Army did not forget. In 1933, after refinement and standardization, the M2 HB, which stands for Heavy Barrel, was formally adopted as standard equipment. It has not left production for a single year since. The last invention. John Moses Browning died November 26, 1926. He died at his workbench inside the FN factory in Liège, Belgium. He was working on another design when his heart stopped. He was 71 years old. His unfinished drawings remained on the table. In his lifetime, he received 128 patents. He designed more than 80 distinct weapons. The majority were produced in the millions. His name is on the M2. Every receiver carries the marking Browning M2 HB. That kind of immortality is not purchased. It is earned across 70 years of daily work. Numbers that tell their own story. Let us look at what this machine actually is. Because understanding why the M2 works means understanding what makes it different from everything else. Total length is 65 inches, that is 1 meter 65 centimeters, slightly taller than an average person. The weight of the gun body alone is 84 pounds, which is 38 kilograms. The ground tripod adds another 44 pounds. Together, you are moving close to 130 pounds of steel and aluminum. This is not a rifle. This is not a personal weapon. This is an emplaced weapon system. It is mounted on vehicles, helicopters, warships, and fortified positions. One person can carry it with significant difficulty. The standard crew is 2 to 3 people. The round, .50 BMG. The cartridge is the .50 BMG. The letters stand for Browning Machine Gun. The bullet diameter is 0.5 inches or 12.7 millimeters. The complete cartridge length is 5.45 inches. The bullet itself weighs between 630 and 750 grains, depending on type. For comparison, a standard 9mm pistol bullet weighs about 124 grains. The M2 round is roughly 5 times heavier. Muzzle velocity is approximately 3,050 feet per second, which is 930 meters per second. That is nearly 3 times the speed of sound. The bullet leaves the barrel with a sonic crack as it breaks the sound barrier. Effective range for aimed fire is roughly 2,000 yards, which is 1,800 meters. Maximum range of the projectile in flight is approximately 4.5 miles, though accuracy at that distance is not the point. At 500 meters, the M2 round penetrates 1 inch of steel plate. That means there is no light armored vehicle it cannot defeat. Armored personnel carriers, light infantry fighting vehicles, light aircraft, the engine block of a truck, the fuel tank of any ground vehicle. Brick and timber cover provide no protection at any combat distance. The M2 was firing at all of these targets in 1944. It is firing at the same targets today. How it works. For anyone who wants to understand, The M2 operates on the short recoil principle. Here is how that works, without any engineering background required. When the trigger is pressed, the firing pin strikes the primer of the cartridge. The powder ignites. Gas pressure builds extremely rapidly inside the cartridge case and pushes the bullet down the barrel. But, by Newton's third law, that same pressure pushes backward against the bolt face and the barrel. The barrel and bolt recoil together rearward a short distance. At that point, the barrel stops, but the bolt continues rearward. As it travels back, it extracts and ejects the empty case and compresses the return spring. The spring then drives the boat forward again. The boat strips a fresh round from the feed belt, chambers it, and locks in place. The barrel returns to battery. The system is ready to fire again. The complete cycle takes less than 130 milliseconds. That gives a cyclic rate of 450 to 600 rounds per minute. The ammunition belt feeds from the right side. Spent links scatter on the ground. Empty brass ejects down and to the right. The muzzle blast produces approximately 155 decibels at the firing position. For context, the threshold of pain for human hearing is about 130 decibels. Crew members work with hearing protection. The barrel, the part that defines reliability. The M2 HB barrel is 45 inches long and weighs about 24 pounds. It is thick and heavy, designed to absorb and dissipate heat from sustained fire. In the original design, barrel replacement required a wrench and precise adjustment of the headspace, which is the gap between the bolt face and the base of the chambered cartridge. Getting that measurement wrong by 0.02 of an inch could cause misfires or, in the worst case, a catastrophic failure. Experienced crews could change a barrel in a few minutes. Inexperienced crews under fire sometimes could not. In the 1990s, the quick change barrel version addressed this. The new barrel clicks into place in seconds, without tools and without headspace adjustment. This meaningfully increased the weapon's sustained rate of fire in combat conditions. The barrel is chrome-lined internally, which reduces wear and simplifies cleaning. Under normal firing doctrine, barrels are changed every 200 to 300 rounds during sustained fire to prevent heat distortion. Under combat conditions, that doctrine has been violated many times. The weapon usually kept working anyway. North Africa, 1942. German tanks and American jeeps. When American forces first engaged German armor in North Africa in late 1942, the early weeks were a disaster. The Battle of Kasserine Pass. American units took heavy losses, fell back, and learned brutal lessons about modern combined arms warfare. But inside that hard experience, one problem stood out clearly. German aircraft were strafing American convoys without effective response. Anti-aircraft artillery took too long to set up. Standard infantry weapons could not reach aircraft at effective engagement altitudes. Except the M2. American mechanics began mounting M2 guns on jeeps on ring mounts directly behind the cab. One gunner, 450 to 600 rounds per minute, effective range out to 1.5 miles. German pilots rapidly learned that a low strafing run against an American convoy equipped with these jeeps was a gamble they might not survive. A Messerschmitt pilot making a low pass presented an ideal target for an experienced M2 gunner who did not need precise aim, only a steady lead and a working trigger. By the end of the North Africa campaign, a significant portion of German aircraft destroyed or disabled over American positions had been engaged by M2 guns mounted on ground vehicles, not by dedicated anti-aircraft artillery. The improvised solution worked better than the planned one. The Pacific, the machine gun versus the kamikaze. By 1944 to 1945, Japanese air strategy had fundamentally changed. Instead of conventional attack profiles, the Japanese were deploying kamikazes, a pilot who did not plan to return. An aircraft loaded with explosives and directed bodily into an American ship. American sailors faced a problem that had no clean solution. How do you stop an aircraft whose pilot does not care about surviving? Conventional anti-aircraft gunnery required lead calculation, predicting where the aircraft would be in the future. A pilot making evasive maneuvers invalidated those calculations. Heavy naval guns could not track fast, low aircraft at close range effectively. The M2 could. Every American warship carried multiple M2 installations, on turrets, on bridge wings, on stern superstructures. Gunners worked in paired and quadruple mounts, the so-called Quad 50s. 4 M2 guns on a single powered turret, capable of producing 1,800 to 2,400 rounds per minute combined. The tactic against kamikazes was different from standard anti-aircraft fire. Gunners created a curtain of fire, a dense stream of rounds through which an aircraft physically could not pass without taking catastrophic damage. Not a precise engagement of a single point, a wall of metal at the aircraft's approach vector. Official U.S. Navy records show that during 1944 and 1945, heavy machine gun fire, primarily M2 installations, accounted for more Japanese aircraft destroyed or disabled in close defense than any other shipboard weapon system. This included both conventional attack aircraft and kamikazes. The weapon designed for ground use had become the primary last line of air defense for the fleet. Normandy, June 6, 1944. On D-Day, the M2 was performing a different role entirely, one removed from air defense. American landing craft carried M2 guns on bow mounts. Their mission during the assault phase was simple. As the ramp drops and soldiers run toward the beach, suppress German firing positions. Do not destroy the bunkers. That is not possible with machine gun fire against reinforced concrete. The goal is to prevent German soldiers from aiming. The German bunkers at Omaha Beach had concrete walls 1 to 2 meters thick. The M2 round would not penetrate that, but an M2 gunner putting rounds across an embrasure opening every fraction of a second meant that a German soldier attempting to sight through that embrasure received concrete fragments and ricochets in his face, even if the round did not penetrate the wall. And with a rate of fire approaching 600 rounds per minute, rounds were hitting that embrasure multiple times per second. Some of the soldiers from the first wave at Omaha who survived described the same thing in their accounts. In the few seconds after the ramp opened and before German fire recovered, a small number of men got past the waterline. Some of those men reached the first available cover. Some of those men eventually made it off the beach. The M2 guns on the landing craft gave them those seconds. The Forgotten War, and the weapon nobody forgot. The Korean War of 1950 to 1953 is often called the Forgotten War. It sits in the shadow of World War II before it and Vietnam after it. But for American soldiers on the Korean Peninsula, it was entirely real and entirely different in character from what had come before. The enemy was not German armored divisions executing mechanized combined arms doctrine. Chinese volunteer forces used mass night assaults. Hundreds and sometimes thousands of men moving in dense waves under cover of darkness, using whistles and bugles for coordination, relying on psychological shock and numerical superiority. Against that tactic, standard machine guns had real limitations. Constant target shift, frequent barrel changes. Long-range precision fire was difficult in darkness. The attacker who accepted heavy casualties could sometimes close the distance to where individual weapons decided the fight. The M2 addressed that problem at a different level. The Quad 50 installation, 4 M2 guns on a single powered mount, produced between 1,800 and 2,400 rounds per minute in a coordinated arc of fire. In the 30 to 40 meter zone in front of a position defended by Quad 50s, survival for the attacker was statistically improbable. Eighth Army records from the Korean conflict documented that after the introduction of Quad 50 installations at key defensive positions, the scale and frequency of mass infantry assaults against those positions declined. Not because the enemy abandoned the tactic, because the attrition at each attempt became operationally unsustainable. The Chosin Reservoir, the M2 at -40, November 1950. The Chosin Reservoir in North Korea, 1st Marine Division surrounded by 8 Chinese divisions, temperature -30 to -40 degrees Celsius. At those temperatures, most mechanical systems stop working. Lubricants freeze solid, springs lose tension, oil in gearboxes becomes semi-solid. Soldiers discovered that their weapons were failing one by one. Marines developed survival techniques born of necessity. They slept with their weapons inside their sleeping bags using body heat. They urinated on frozen bolt mechanisms to thaw them. They wrapped weapons against their bodies during movement. The M2 kept working. The heavy barrels and massive receiver group retained heat longer than lighter weapons. Large caliber ammunition had more reliable primer ignition at extreme cold. And the design Browning had drawn in 1918, intentionally simple, with tolerances that allowed for field operation under imperfect conditions, accepted a degree of ice formation that locked up more precise mechanisms completely. This was not a case of the weapon exceeding the designer's expectations. This was a case of the designer making correct choices in 1918 that proved valid in circumstances he could not possibly have anticipated. The 1st Marine Division broke out of the Chosin encirclement, 78 kilometers through mountains and through 3 Chinese divisions, fighting the entire distance, carrying their wounded and their dead. Military historians consider it one of the most remarkable fighting withdrawals in American history. M2 guns covered that withdrawal the entire way, the Huey, and the birth of air cavalry. The Vietnam War reinvented how armies moved and fought. The helicopter became the primary means of rapid deployment, resupply, and fire support. And the helicopter required a complete rethinking of what weapons it should carry. The UH-1 Iroquois, universally called the Huey, was a light utility helicopter. It moved soldiers into landing zones, evacuated casualties, delivered supplies. But an unprotected Huey in a contested area was vulnerable. Slow, with a large rotor signature, flying at low altitude over terrain held by a determined enemy. Armed gunship variants appeared rapidly. Hueys with M2 guns mounted on pintle mounts in the cabin doors or on fixed-wing pylons became standard escort for troop lift operations. They were called gunships, and their effectiveness shaped the entire course of the war. The M2 proved ideal for helicopter mounting for 3 reasons. First, range. In Vietnamese jungle, a contact could begin at 50 meters or at 500 meters. The M2 was effective at both distances. Lighter helicopter weapons lost significant effectiveness past 300 meters. Second, penetration. Jungle is not open terrain. The enemy concealed himself behind trees, brush, earthworks, and timber construction. Standard caliber rounds shed energy after passing through multiple layers of vegetation. The .50 round did not. It penetrated every form of cover a soldier could realistically find in the field. Third, psychological effect. American advisors documented that the appearance of an armed helicopter over enemy positions, particularly with M2 tracer fire visible, produced immediate behavioral changes. Units of the Viet Cong that continued advancing under small arms fire frequently dispersed or went to ground when M2 fire came on target. Ambush on Route 9. The story of Corporal Mitchell, Laos, 1971. Operation Lam Son 7, 19. The South Vietnamese attempt, with American air support, to cut the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos. A convoy of 12 trucks moving along a mountain road. In the lead was a Jeep with an M2 on the ring mount. Behind the wheel, a South Vietnamese driver. On the gun, an American advisor, Corporal Dennis Mitchell from Kentucky. The ambush opened without warning. A rocket-propelled grenade took the first truck. Automatic weapons fire from both sides of the road. The convoy stopped. The South Vietnamese driver was killed in the first seconds. Mitchell made a decision without time to think it through.
He climbed into the driver's seat, moved the Jeep forward and out of the column, turned it sideways across the road to provide cover for the lead truck, then got back on the gun. For the next 20 minutes, Mitchell engaged targets on both sides of the road, muzzle flashes, movement in the tree line, anything that could be an attacker. He rotated the gun 360 degrees. He was alone on the weapon. The convoy reversed and withdrew under his covering fire.
When help arrived, Mitchell had roughly a third of his last ammunition belt remaining. I wasn't thinking about what I was doing. I was thinking about keeping them off the trucks. The M2 let me answer fire from any direction fast enough to matter. With a lighter weapon, I would not have had the volume of fire to hold them back. Dennis Mitchell, interview with the Vietnam Veterans Association, 1995. Mitchell received the Bronze Star. The convoy reached the base, the Soviet DSHK, the direct rival. The Soviet Army had its own answer to the M2, the DSHK, named after its designers, Degtyaryov and Shpagin. Adopted in 1938, caliber 12.7 by 108 millimeters, which is the same bullet diameter as the 50 BMG. Here is an honest comparison. The DSHK cartridge is slightly longer than the BMG round, at 108 millimeters versus 99. This means somewhat more propellant and slightly higher muzzle energy, around 19,000 joules versus 17,000 for the M2. The difference is real, but not dramatic. Cyclic rate for the DSHK is 450 to 600 rounds per minute, essentially the same as the M2. The DSHK gun body weighs about 75 pounds versus 84 for the M2. The DSHK is a bit lighter. Reliability. Both systems have outstanding reputations in extreme conditions. The DSHK served in Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and dozens of other conflicts. So did the M2. On this dimension, they are essentially equal. The real difference is not technical. The real difference is numbers. The United States has produced more than 3 million M2 guns since 1933. The DSHK and its variants were produced in the hundreds of thousands. The M2 was fitted to the vehicle of every American ally in every conflict. The DSHK was supplied to Soviet allies. In nearly every major conflict of the second half of the 20th century, M2 and DSHK guns were on opposite sides. They fired at each other in Korea, in Vietnam, in Afghanistan, across the Middle East. Two weapons designed in the same decade in opposing countries serving opposing armies, each built for the same basic purpose. The German MG-131, the aerial competitor. In aircraft, the closest German equivalent to the M2 was the MG-131, a 13mm aircraft machine gun adopted by the Luftwaffe in 1940. The MG-131 was significantly lighter than the M2, about 37 pounds versus 84. For aircraft installation, weight matters enormously. Its cyclic rate was 900 to 950 rounds per minute, meaningfully higher than the M2, but the 13mm round carried less powder than the 50 BMG. Muzzle velocity was 2,300 to 2,400 feet per second versus 3,050 for the M2. That translated to less penetration and less effective range. American fighter pilots knew the difference from the receiving end. The P-51 Mustang, P-47 Thunderbolt, and P-38 Lightning were armed with 4, 6, or 8 M2 guns. The density of fire meant that a burst on target was almost certainly catastrophic for the target aircraft. When we saw a P-51 lining up behind us, we broke away immediately. Not because we were cowards, because we knew he was carrying 8 50 caliber guns. One burst could take a wing off. Heinz Bahr, Luftwaffe ace with 220 victories, post-war interview. Iraq, 2003. The M2 versus vehicle-borne explosives. When American forces entered Iraq in March 2003, they expected the war they got for the first 3 weeks. A rapid conventional advance, destruction of the Iraqi army in the field, capture of Baghdad. Then a different war began. Insurgency. No front line, no uniformed enemy. The primary weapon was the improvised explosive device, a bomb buried under a road or hidden in an abandoned vehicle. Convoys moved through Iraqi streets with soldiers standing in turrets, exposed, watching for threats that could come from any direction. And then came the vehicle-borne explosive. A truck or car packed with explosives driven at speed toward an American position or convoy. Stopping a moving vehicle is not a simple problem. A pickup truck weighing 3,000 pounds, moving at 60 miles per hour, has enormous kinetic energy. A standard rifle round will not stop it. 10 standard rifle rounds might not stop it. The driver, if determined, keeps the vehicle moving toward the target even while taking fire. A .50 BMG round, weighing 650 grains and traveling at 3,000 feet per second, carries approximately 17,000 joules of energy at the muzzle. It destroys engine blocks. It penetrates engine compartments and disables the mechanical systems that keep a vehicle moving. It physically stops what it hits. Army records from 2004 through 2008 document dozens of cases in which M2 gunners engaged and stopped vehicle-borne explosives before they reached their targets. These are not statistics. These are people who are alive because the gunner had the right weapon. Afghanistan. Mountains and standoff distances. The Afghan conflict showed the M2 in an unexpected role. A weapon for fighting in high terrain where engagement distances stretch far beyond what standard infantry weapons can reach. In the mountains of Afghanistan, an ambush from a ridgeline could begin at 800 meters, or 1,000 meters, or 1,200 meters. Standard machine gun calibers in 7.62 millimeter lose significant effectiveness past 600 meters. At 1,000 meters, a standard machine gun round is still lethal, but accuracy and hitting probability fall sharply. The M2 was designed to be effective at 1,800 meters. At 1,000 meters, it is still in its primary engagement envelope. Afghan veterans described engagements where the only weapon system that could reach and affect the enemy at contact range was the M2 on the vehicle mount. Every other weapon on the objective was outside its effective range. The M2 was not. This is a weapon designed in 1918, solving a problem on an Afghan mountain pass in 2009 that the designer could never have imagined. He could not have known about Afghanistan. He could not have known about mountain counterinsurgency. He designed it to reach out and hit things at long range with sufficient energy to destroy them. That is still what it does. The longest service life of any machine gun in history. The standard service life of military equipment is 20 to 30 years. After that, a weapon system typically becomes tactically or technologically obsolete and is replaced. This is the normal life cycle of military hardware. The M2 entered U.S. Army service in 1933. That is 91 years of continuous service as of 2024. In that time, 4 generations of soldiers have served. Dozens of infantry weapon systems have been introduced and retired. Hundreds of aircraft types have come and gone. Thousands of military vehicles have been fielded and scrapped. The M2 remains. This is not because the Army never looked for a replacement. In the 1980s, there were serious programs to develop a new heavy machine gun with a new cartridge. In the 1990s, the XM312, a lighter 50 caliber design, was tested and evaluated. Both programs were canceled. Not because the new weapons did not work, because the M2 worked better. With an enormous existing base of trained crews, spare parts, maintenance procedures, and institutional knowledge that no new system could match without decades of operational experience. The M2 won replacement competitions by being irreplaceable. 12 years, no barrel change. During the Iraq War, a documented event occurred that is difficult to process. In 2007, an M2 gun that had been in service with an Iraqi security force was brought in for technical inspection by American advisors. The weapon was functional and had been in active use. Inspection showed the barrel had not been replaced since 1995. 12 years. The firing record indicated more than 85,000 rounds had been fired through that barrel. Standard replacement doctrine calls for a new barrel every 10,000 rounds. The gun was still functioning, with a barrel showing significant wear, but functioning. This is not a recommendation. No armorer would endorse running a barrel 8 times past its replacement interval. But it is evidence of the engineering margin built into a design created by a man who understood that field conditions are never what the manual describes. Browning designed to a standard, and then beyond that standard, because he had spent enough time around real weapons in real conditions to know that soldiers do not always have the ability to maintain equipment on schedule. The production numbers. Since 1933, more than 3 million M2 guns have been manufactured in all variants. Current primary manufacturers include General Dynamics and U.S. Ordnance. The weapon is also produced under license by F.N. Herstal in Belgium, the same company where Browning died at his workbench in 1926. The current unit cost under U.S. government contract is approximately $14,000 to $18,000. Individual 50 BMG rounds cost between $3 and $10, depending on type and quantity. The M2 is in service with more than 100 nations. It is manufactured under license in Taiwan, Israel, Germany, and several other countries. No other small arms system in history has achieved comparable production numbers combined with this length of active service. Conclusion. What remains? If you ever see an M2 in person, at a museum, at an air show, at a military demonstration, look at the receiver. On the left side of the receiver body, there is a marking. On most examples, it reads something like Browning M2HB. The name of the man who designed it is part of the official designation of the weapon. John Moses Browning died in 1926, 98 years before this script was written. His name is on a machine gun that is mounted on American vehicles in active operations today. That is what tested by time actually means. In the century since Browning finished this design, warfare has changed completely. Guided missiles, laser designators, active protection systems, drone warfare. All of it exists, and all of it is used. But when the requirement is to stop a vehicle-borne explosive on a road in Iraq, or to reach a target on an Afghan ridge at 1,000 meters, or to provide close air defense for a naval vessel under attack, the M2 is still doing what it was doing in 1944. Because one quiet engineer from Utah, who died at his workbench at 71 years old, made the right decisions in 1918. He did not receive 128 patents by accident. He received them because he understood mechanical problems at a level most people never reach, and he solved them cleanly, and the solutions held. The Browning M2 is not a museum piece. It is a weapon that is keeping people alive on the other side of the world right now, and it was drawn by a man that most people have never heard of.